my name's Andrew, and this is the pilot, I guess, for a new podcast I'm going to be producing. It's also a YouTube channel, which I'm calling We Only Want the Earth. I'll talk about that in a moment. And basically it's going to be offering political analysis from an anarchist perspective. I've been an active anarchist since the late 1980s, mostly here in Ireland, and you can tell I'm in Ireland because I'm getting rained on as I record that. It's one of the perils of doing outdoor shoots, but also in the United States, Canada and Britain, London in particular. I've also taken part in events in Chiapas, in Spanish State, in Prague, in France, in the Netherlands, Norway, quite a range of experiences, and conducted speaking tours, probably done about 100 meetings outside of Ireland. So that's a bit of context as to where I'm coming from and why I might have some interesting things to share with you. In terms of what I want to do with this podcast, there's a couple of goals. One thing I want to do is interview other anarchists, and not just do it on a kind of basis of interviewing about a particular topic or expertise, but also an interview with them about their anarchist life, if you like. I think that's important because I think the thing that motivates us and keeps us active isn't just what we fight for, but how we fight for it and the people we meet along the way. And this will be a way of talking to people about that. The other thing I intend to do is, as I said, analysis. I'm not going to particularly focus on Ireland because I'm essentially trying to appeal to an international audience with this. So I've already recorded one episode that's looking at climate change, why I'm very alarmed by climate change, Extinction Rebellion, and what I think are some of the shortcomings with Extinction Rebellion, most notably its failure to take an anti-capitalist perspective and its almost complete blindness on colonialism. So if you're watching this, go and have a look and you'll find that. The rain continues. So the name I'm using for the podcast is We Only Want the Earth. That's actually from a poem or song by James Connolly. Connolly's probably best known because he was executed in 1916 by the British because he was part of the group that staged a rebellion in Dublin against British rule. He was somewhat different from the rest of them. He was part of an organisation called the Irish Citizens' Army, and that had actually formed during a huge strike in 1913 to protect the strikers from police attacks. There were several strikers killed in the course of that 1913 struggle during police baton charges. Connolly is a significant figure as well, because although he's often thought of as an Irish nationalist, in fact he was born in Scotland of Irish parents, and had done at the time with the Industrial Workers of the World in the United States. The IWW, which still exists, is a revolutionary syndicalist trade union. So if you actually read Connolly's writings, they're quite heavily infused with the ideas of revolutionary syndicalism. And he's an interesting figure from that perspective in terms of understanding the left today. He doesn't simply sit in any one place. The other purpose of the name We Only Want the Earth, his original purpose, the point he was making in the poem was when people were telling him he needed to moderate his demands, the demand he had was most moderate: we only want the Earth. But in this era of climate change, there is another angle to that as well, and that is the destruction that we're all facing as capitalism destroys the climate, and we only want the Earth is also therefore a demand that we want the Earth. We don't want to see this planet destroyed. And then the last thing I want to mention in this introduction is why I'm doing a podcast in the first place. As I said earlier, I've been active since the 80s. I've done an awful lot of writing in that time. I probably have published over 500 pieces, I would imagine. Some of those have been translated, I think, into about 14 languages altogether. And for a very long time, if I was trying to explain complex ideas to people, I'd use the written form. But I'm kind of quite a keen student of history, revolutionary history in particular, and one of the things I've been fascinated by is the way that the modern idea of revolution, kind of republicanism initially, then socialism and anarchism and all those forms, was very dependent on writing as an ability to communicate ideas from one person to a lot of people. And that only became possible really, you know, in the 17th century, like in 1760s, 1770s, due to technological change in the form of the invention of the printing press, and also a kind of ideological shift which came with Protestantism and a desire to read the Bible. And what that actually meant was that for the first time there was quite a segment of the population were literate. At that point, it's not huge, it's probably no more than 5%, but 5% was enough so that everybody would know somebody who was literate, and also that the process of publishing became cheap enough that it was possible to produce many copies of a pamphlet and for those to be somewhat affordable to ordinary people. And indeed, one of the early reactions of those with wealth and power to that is they put a tax on pamphlets to try and make sure they weren't affordable. In those days, in that early period, as I said, maybe 5% of people were literate, so not everybody could read this, but there was a whole culture around coffee shops. You know, if you read accounts of the American Revolution, the French Revolution, 1798 in Ireland, you'll see this, where basically people would go to coffee shops and the people who were literate would read out the revolutionary press, and that's how you found out what was going on. And that's interesting in comparison with what came later, because it also meant that you automatically had a group discussion around those ideas. You know, somebody would read it out and then other people would go, well, I'm not sure about this, what about that? And so that created a culture of revolutionary organisation alongside it. Fast forward into the 20th century, you get the invention of radio, which actually is really important, amongst other things, in terms of the rise of fascism, and then later on television. And initially those are one-to-many forms of communication that only rich people can use. Rich people or powerful people or people the state or very rich people want to put on television or radio. But of course, with the internet revolution, in particular with the arrival of YouTube in 2007, 2008, very recent I think, it suddenly became possible for this sort of one-to-many communication where, you know, essentially what I'm doing here, there is no real budget. I'm using my phone to record it and a kind of €100 microphone I bought, but it's theoretically possible for putting this on YouTube for it to reach vast amounts of people. And I think that has actually shifted the way political communication works. I think it's now the case that people coming into radical politics are absorbing their ideas through videos, they're absorbing their ideas very obviously through podcasts, and that rather than long form writing is what's key to reaching people. I don't intend to give up on the writing, but that's why I'm kind of switching to doing some of this podcast stuff. I have previously done quite a lot of work in both photography and video and a certain amount of audio work, but there's a story that the early days of the cinema, if you look at those films, what they basically consist of is somebody putting a camera in a theatre and filming what's happening on the stage. And you know, a film is basically a stage play acted out in front of a camera, where if you look at film nowadays, it's very much more complex and makes all sorts of both assumptions about what the audience understands that has nothing to do with the stage, but also you've got technologies that enable you to do things that you couldn't do in a theatre. And so what I've done previously in terms of video and audio has very much been, you know, setting up a camera, setting up a microphone, pointing at a meeting that's happening anyway, or a march that's going past, recording that and uploading it, and you know, got quite a lot of traffic and views out of that. But with this I wanted to do something different, which is actually tailor what I'm doing to the fact that it's actually going to be video. I'm not just happening to record a meeting or a talk, I'm actually doing this in a deliberate sense. So that's another aspect of what I'm going to be doing with the podcast YouTube channel as I move forward. I've no idea how successful this will be, I've no idea how good I'll be at it. I'm kind of deploying what skills I have in the way I always have. You know, I learnt web design way back in about 2001 for similar reasons. I was using Usenet before that. You know, I shift along with the technologies as they become available, and every now and again you get a bit of a breakthrough. I'm a little bit late to podcasting, I think, but we'll see how these go down. If you like it, do remember to subscribe, share this, and if you post a comment, I will respond to it. I'm quite interested to know what you think about it. And with that, the rain is dying down, of course, and the shoot is finished.